evening, everyone. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the Mary MacKillop Oration dinner as part of the Catholic Social Services Australia conference. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, I am Bridget Meaney. I'm the Director of Mission and Strategy at Catholic Health Australia, and I will be your MC this evening. I was just hearing you've had some fairly illustrious MCs in the past, so I hope I live up to expectations in this role tonight. So whether you are out in the heat today or avoiding that in the very powerful air-conditioned conference rooms today, I hope it hasn't worn you out too much, because I think that the party is just getting started tonight. Can I begin following that wonderful smoking ceremony and welcome to country we had this afternoon by also adding my acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the lands on which we are on tonight, the Wurundjeri people who have continued to care and cultivate this land for continuous generations, and who we are very blessed to have provide so much service and so many gifts to our Catholic community and the wider community. And I welcome and acknowledge any traditional owners who might be here tonight. A little bit later on tonight, we'll hear from Claire Victory, who will be providing the Mary MacKillop Oration. But a few housekeeping rules first. For those of you who have just arrived for the dinner tonight, you can find the toilets out here. We have a wealth of VIPs, of which I don't want to offend anyone. I do not have a list of. Therefore, I'm going to assume you're either all VIPs or none of you are VIPs, just to be on the safe side. And maybe that's in the theme of the conference as well, with being common. So we're all commoners on the journey tonight. Tonight's 2024 Mary MacKillop Oration will be given by Claire Victory, and we welcome her here tonight. Claire will be speaking on the topic, Going Back to Our Roots, What Grounds Us Today in Our Shared Work. Claire has spent 29 years in various roles and capacities with St Vincent de Paul Society and was its national president from 2019 to 2023. She's trained in law and after a number of years in legal practice is currently Director of Industrial Policy and Practice at the Australian Nurses and Midwifery Federation South Australia branch, which I very much appreciate as a former nurse. She believes that most people are essentially good, but that we need strong government and a strong sense of community to ensure that the dignity of all people is respected. Can we please have a warm welcome for Claire tonight?
Hi, and thanks for having me. It's an honour to be here on land that always was and always will be Aboriginal land, the lands of the Wurundjeri people. And I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I acknowledge the cultural authority of Indigenous people here today. It's an honour and a little intimidating to be here in this room full of such great people doing such amazing work in our community. I know a few of you, and I hope to meet more of you over the coming days. I'm going to start by giving you a quick rundown of who I am, or at least some things I've done. And the reason I do that is because tonight, by necessity, I will be saying some things and giving some opinions about the Catholic Church. And I think viewing or describing the Church can be a lot like the parable of the blind man trying to describe an elephant, trying to imagine what the whole thing looks like while only being able to feel one little part of it. So I'm hoping that if you understand which bits of the elephant I've felt over my 40 years on this earth, it will hopefully provide some context for how I describe the metaphorical elephant that is the Church, and any views that I might offer tonight. So I was born and raised Catholic in Adelaide, the lands of the Kaurna people, and that's where I still live and work. I went to Catholic primary and high schools. My first job at 17 was doing data entry at Centrecare. I have at various times been a regular Mass attendee, a committed parishioner, an infrequent Mass attendee, and a parish nomad. As a kid, teenager and young adult, I was at various times an altar server, Eucharistic minister, reader, children's liturgy leader. I started volunteering with Vinnie's when I was 10, and I've continued that for the past 30 years, over which time I have volunteered in Vinnie's shops, visited elderly people, assisted people experiencing poverty in their homes and on the streets, taken at-risk kids and teens away on camps and activity days, and held various leadership positions in South Australia, nationally and internationally. I studied law and arts at uni, and I later studied some loss, grief and trauma counselling and family dispute resolution. I went into legal practice, primarily in employment, workers' compensation and civil liability law. I worked in a small firm in Adelaide for 15 years, acting mostly for employers and insurers, including Catholic Church insurances, and for Catholic and other Christian health, aged care, education and social and community service providers. And for the past almost 2 years, I've worked for the Nurses Union, where I head up the industrial team, which regularly finds itself assisting members in disputes against some of those same aged care and healthcare providers. By virtue of my role as Vinnie's National President at the time, I was during 2021 and 2022 a member of the Plenary Council, which considered a range of significant issues and reforms facing the Catholic Church of Australia. I'm a member of the Parish Pastoral Council for some reason, and Diocesan Pastoral Council back home. I've been on the board of a Catholic school, and I've been on various committees and councils advising various Catholic social services organisations. And I need to make it clear that I speak tonight on behalf of precisely none of those employers and organisations. Any views that I offer tonight might be shared by some other individuals, but they are my own. What I am not is a current employee or leader of a Catholic social services organisation like most of you are. I'm not a client of a Catholic social services organisation. I'm definitely not a theologian or any sort of religious scholar. I'm not a person who's been harmed by my interactions with the Church. And for the most part, I'm not a person who has been marginalised within or excluded from the Catholic Church. I'm fortunate to have received opportunities throughout my life, in and through the Church, more because of rather than despite my age and gender. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, to acknowledge my privilege as a young-ish, white, English-speaking, heterosexual, cisgender, non-disabled, relatively wealthy, well-educated, employed woman. And I acknowledge that all of that means I've had doors open for me which have remained closed to other people. I've been given opportunities, including the opportunity to be here with you these 3 days and speak to you tonight, and I'm very grateful for those opportunities. So, all of that probably makes me more optimistic than most about the future of the Catholic Church and the role it has to play in contemporary Australian society. And that's especially the case when it comes to the role of Catholic social services. So, as you know, the theme of this year's conference is Commons, Commonality, Common Good. Over these 3 days, we're considering what we, as a diverse group of people, have in common in our paid and volunteered work within Catholic social services, how we strive for fairness and justice within our common home, and how we work for the common good. I've been invited to speak tonight on the topic of going back to our roots, what grounds us today in our shared work. And in reflecting on that topic, I came up with a few things that I think ground us and connect us in our shared work. First and most obviously, we are founded on and constantly informed and inspired by Catholic social teaching as a manifestation of the gospel message. The next element is that as part of our commitment to Catholic social teaching, we're driven by a desire, really a need, to actually dismantle unjust structures, to bring about social change and to fight for it if necessary. I think another part of our shared DNA is that our story has been written and shaped by revolutionaries, rebels and people of uncommon courage. And another thing that connects us is that we are the Catholic Church to many people. And I think we need to remember that and own it and remind other people that in our work, in our ministries, in our organisations, we are the community of people who are living out the gospel message following the example of Jesus. So Catholic social teaching. Generally speaking, when we talk about Catholic social teaching, we're talking about the Church's formal pronouncements on social justice issues, from Pope Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum in 1891 onwards, through a series of papal encyclicals, which are circular letters prepared by the Pope with the assistance of experts for wide circulation. The Church has sought to address pressing social issues. And context is really important in Catholic social teaching. Rather than give us hard and fast rules, it calls us to apply our Christian conscience to the real world, to look at what is happening in the world, particularly to those suffering poverty and disadvantage, and assess how we should respond. It draws on contemporary economics and social and political sciences. And so, over time, we've seen encyclicals, and through them the development of the body of Catholic social teaching, come to life against a backdrop of industrial progress and the exploitation of workers, the Cold War and the Vietnam War, wars and famine in Africa, the civil rights movement, political upheaval, consumerism and unemployment, the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe, and the global climate crisis. And throughout all of the encyclicals developed in response to these various crises, common major themes in Catholic social teaching emerged. The dignity of the human person. The human person is made in the image of God, and human dignity must be the starting point for an ethical vision of society. Common good and community. We are social beings, and we realise our dignity and human rights in relationship with each other. The way that we organise our society directly affects human dignity and the capacity of each person to grow in community. The call to love thy neighbour is both an individual and a social obligation. We all have a responsibility to contribute to the good of the whole society. Option for the poor. The moral test of a society is how it treats its most vulnerable members. Those experiencing poverty have the most urgent claim on the conscience of the nation, and we must look at public policy decisions in terms of how they affect those who are most marginalised and powerless. Rights and responsibilities. We can only protect human dignity and achieve a healthy community if human rights are protected. Rights to food, shelter and clothing, employment, education and healthcare. And corresponding to these rights are responsibilities which we all have towards each other and the larger society. The role of government and subsidiarity. The state has a positive moral function in promoting human dignity, protecting human rights and building the common good. The functions of government should be performed at the lowest possible level, and all people have a right and responsibility to participate in political institutions so that government can achieve its proper goals. Economic justice. The economy must serve the people, not the other way around. Workers have a right to safe and productive work, to fair wages, to organise and join unions. People have a right to economic initiative and private property, but within limits. No one is allowed to accumulate excessive wealth while others lack the basic necessities. Stewardship of God's creation. The goods of the earth are intended by God for the benefit of everyone, and how we treat the environment is a measure of our stewardship and a sign of our respect for the Creator. Promotion of peace and disarmament. Peace is a positive, action-oriented concept. In the words of Pope John Paul II, peace is not just the absence of war. It involves collaboration and binding agreements. Peace is the fruit of justice, which is dependent upon right order among human beings. Participation. All people have the right to participate in the economic, political and cultural life of society. It is wrong for a person to be unfairly excluded from participation in society. And global solidarity and development. We are one human family, and our responsibilities towards each other cross national, racial, economic and ideological differences. We must strive globally for justice, respecting and promoting the personal, social, economic and political rights of individuals, communities and nations. So what is clear in all of this in that evolving body of Catholic social teaching is that our faith doesn't just call us to be gentle and kind-hearted and charitable. To actually follow the teaching and example of Jesus, we must be political, because we must be taking the side of the oppressed and fighting for a more just and compassionate society, which includes dismantling unjust systems, structures and attitudes. And it is this strong history and tradition, grounded so firmly in the life and ministry of Jesus, that makes me so passionate about the vital role that the Catholic Church has to play in our society today. And you, through your work in our social service organisations, are the ones most significantly playing that vital role day in, day out. I know there's a lot of you that might not actually be Catholic. You might be baptised Catholic, but are what people would call not practising Catholic, because you don't go to Mass regularly or at all. You might be understandably put off being associated with the Church, and honestly, who could blame you when most people, quite understandably, associate the Catholic Church or being Catholic with some of the most awful things: institutional child sex abuse, toxic patriarchy, the marginalisation of women and LGBTIQA+ people, clericalism, and an obsession with strict rules, especially around who you can have sex with and when. You may think of the Church as a procession of very serious-looking priests and bishops in all their finery, delivering sermons and perpetuating a very old set of rules and traditions, and you might think that that's something you can't connect with, or that doesn't make sense to you, and I get that. But that's not necessarily the true history of the Church when you understand the Church as the community of people committed to following the example of Jesus. Some of you may have read Anna Funder's excellent recent book, Wifedom, Mrs. Orwell's Invisible Life. It tells the story of Eileen O'Shaughnessy, a woman who played such a significant role in the life and work of her husband, George Orwell, and yet who was largely erased from accounts of his life and work, removing her from history while her husband is praised for work which she enabled and contributed to so significantly. The Church has its own brilliant figures who have shaped it, and it's many of those characters to whom we owe the current existence and strength of our Catholic social service ministries and organisations. Some of those people have eventually gained at least some of the recognition that they deserve, while others remain somewhat hidden. And I want to talk to you about just a few of those characters, because in them and their stories, you may find something a little more familiar and relatable than the structure, tradition and clericalism with which you may associate the Catholic Church. So, a quick run through of 3 revolutionaries, rebels and people of uncommon courage. And I'm going to start in Paris in 1833, a place of extreme poverty, disease and distress. A wealthy 20-year-old Catholic law student by the name of Frederick Ozanam was, along with his friends, a member of the Conference of History. The conference was a group formed by Emmanuel Bailly, the editor of the Catholic Tribune, for students to debate historical and philosophical issues. During one of their meetings, Frederick and other Catholic conference members were defending attacks by their fellow students on Christianity. The essence of the attacks on Christianity was this: Christians are doing nothing for those suffering poverty in Paris. Frederick and his friends are talking about Christianity, but they're not actually taking any action themselves to help the poor. So those students challenged Frederick and his fellow Catholics, show us your works. This confrontation prompted Frederick and his friends to expand on and better organise some work that they had started to do with a local daughter of charity, Sister Rosalie Rondeau. They were helping her to distribute some food to families living in squalor, and they now redoubled their efforts. And Sister Rosalie didn't just give them instructions on who they had to visit or what sort of help they needed in terms of rent or food or firewood. She also counselled Frederick and his friends on how to serve those they visited. She taught them to minister to people with love, respecting their dignity, recognising them as fellow humans created in God's image and likeness. The Conference of History soon became a Conference of Charity, and within 2 years, membership had soared from 8 to over 100 members. The group had been organised into multiple conferences within Paris, and other parts of France and in Rome, and the organisation had been named the Society of St Vincent de Paul. Now present in over 150 countries, VIDIS, as it's often affectionately known in Australia, has 800,000 members and 1.5 million volunteers worldwide. The St Vincent de Paul Society doesn't operate under the authority of a diocesan bishop or religious order, but it is a mission-driven Catholic organisation comprised and enriched by lay people, Catholic and otherwise. Frederick Ozanam was a learned man, and he drew upon his knowledge of politics, history and economics, along with his person-to-person contact with people living in poverty in Paris, to pen a series of articles about the socio-political situation and its effect on the people of Paris. And in so doing, he developed a form of social Catholicism and urged the conservative church to become more engaged with social concerns. Now, Frederick died nearly 40 years before Pope Leo XIII issued Rerum Novarum, but in his shaping of social Catholicism, Frederick indirectly influenced the formulation of Catholic social teaching in the decades to come, and anticipated the Second Vatican Council's declarations on the role of the laity and the place of the Church in the modern world. The interconnectedness of the human family runs through both Vincentian spirituality and Catholic social teaching, and in this way you can see a direct link back to the life and actions of Jesus. He proclaimed freedom from slavery, sight to the blind, shelter for widows, the welcoming of children and strangers, love and kindness to outcasts. And he was not only promising salvation to individuals, but calling for a new society. Next, Mary MacKillop. We know her well as Australia's first saint, but it's important to remember that Mary MacKillop once pissed off people in the institutional church so much that she found herself excommunicated. You're likely aware that starting in the 1860s, Mary MacKillop and her small group of Sisters of St Joseph worked with Father Woods to bring education to children living in poverty, especially in rural areas. Over time, attempts were made to undermine, disband and destroy the order, and in fighting against those attempts, Mary was accused of insubordination and excommunicated. Mary was a trailblazer. Dedicated and determined, she was a strong female leader in 19th century Australia, and her legacy lives on, not just in the works of the Sisters of St Joseph, but in our education system. And finally, I'm going to give another South Australian example. Born in Tarlee in 1917, Hannah Buckley was orphaned at a young age and was cared for, along with her two sisters, by two aunts who lived together opposite Loretto Convent. The two aunts had a strong focus on social issues and the importance of education, and these were attributes that they passed on to Hannah and her sisters. The family attended Mass at St Ignatius and were part of a wider family involved in the young Christian students and a range of Catholic lay activities. Hannah attended Loretto Convent and then studied social work. Hannah was one of 6 inaugural students at the South Australian Board of Social Study and Training in 1937, and the course included studies of hygiene, dietetics, psychology, economics, and social philosophy and history. At the age of 21, Hannah became the first Catholic graduate of the new field of social work. In 1941, Archbishop Matthew Beevich was interested in establishing a family welfare bureau and was especially keen to coordinate the activities of Catholic orphanages and other charitable institutions. Coming as she did from a well-known Catholic family, Hannah came to the attention of Archbishop Beevich, and in early 1942, the Archbishop appointed Hannah as the first employee of the Catholic Social Service Bureau. The evacuation of civilians from Northern Australia during the early years of the Second World War saw large numbers of families and unaccompanied children arrive in Adelaide. Hannah provided essential support to many of these families, with her personal empathy and careful assessment of the needs of the children, bringing a new level of professionalism to the referral process to orphanages. Post-war immigration, relationship breakdowns and housing shortages all contributed to client demand over the next few years. Hannah went on to work in hospitals and for the South Australian Tuberculosis Association, and in these roles she was instrumental in establishing social work as an integral function within medical settings. The Catholic Social Service Bureau grew into the organisation that became known as Centrecare Catholic Family Services. Hannah continued the work that Norma Parker and Constance Moffat had undertaken in Melbourne and Sydney to establish the social work profession. She was a remarkable woman whose contribution to Catholic social welfare and to social work in general deserves great recognition. She was a leader in the development of social work practice in hospitals, a role model for a generation of social workers, and a woman unafraid to fight for social justice. So, in giving you those few quick examples, I hope you can see the modern history and development of the Catholic Church in what might be a new way to some of you. I hope you can see, or that you're reminded, that the Church, properly understood, is not a building or a hierarchy or a collection of authority figures delivering and enforcing rules that exclude and punish. Rather, the Church is a community of people with its own heroes and leaders who were and are ordinary, flawed, brilliant people, often troublemakers and agitators, common people of uncommon courage. And I suspect many people just like that in this room, or who've inspired people in this room. A huge number of Australians are in contact with the Catholic Church. It's just not via mass. It's through their own and their children's education in Catholic schools. It's through their contact with Catholic healthcare providers and community services. It's through being employees or volunteers or partners or clients of organisations like yours. We hear a lot about how the Church should go out to those on the peripheries, to meet people who are excluded and marginalised. And yes, that is exactly the example that Jesus set, but it's important to keep in mind that the Church is already there on the peripheries in so many ways. Our Catholic schools and social services are out there doing it, but they're too often attacked, marginalised and characterised as not Catholic or not Catholic enough, because it hasn't suited a loud minority for our Church, for the doing what Jesus would do of it all, to actually look like a 7-year-old Minnie's kid from St Joe's in Yorktown donating food to families in need, or a 25-year-old social worker at Centrecare working to reunify foster kids with their families, or a team of educators setting up a school specifically to teach and nurture teenage parents, or any of the innumerable ways that the Church is in fact doing Jesus' work in the here and now, in the way he taught us, which looks nothing like hierarchy and everything like wearing a purple to school so that the gay kid or teacher feels less alone and loved. And here I want to add another thing that we as Catholic social services have in common, and which enables and compels us to do better. And that's the inclusion of diverse voices around the table. Boards and leadership teams within Catholic organisations frequently come up against the question or challenge of how to ensure they remain true to their Catholic faith, their mission and values, without insisting on their leaders, employees and members all being Catholic, and how they can service the needs of the community, including within the bounds of government funding that might come into play in certain programs, while still being proudly Catholic. I've certainly experienced that dilemma or perceived challenge at Winnie's, and I know Centrecare has grappled with it in different ways, and I'm sure lots of you have been involved in discussions or debates about this, and we heard about it during the panel today as well. But here's the thing, in my experience, the inclusion of diverse voices, and by that I mean genders and gender identities, sexualities, races, cultures, ages, life experiences, and also different religious experiences, has only ever served to make things better. When in 2019, the then Attorney General Christian Porter cited Vinnie's as an example of an organisation that could benefit from proposed religious discrimination exemptions because discriminating against prospective employees in our shops would help us to preserve our religious ethos, I was pretty pissed off. And it wasn't just because he'd used our good name to support proposed legislation that I found offensive and to thereby add to political debate that I knew would hurt people. I was angry and upset because I knew how much our organisation benefited from and continues to benefit from the efforts and commitment every day of members and employees who are not Catholic, including some who've been shunned by the Church. And it's not just that these people are dedicated to the cause despite the fact that they're not Catholic, and so, that's good enough. It's that their unique life experiences, including their experiences of a life lived outside the church, actually enhance our work and mission and our decision making. They're not causing us to deviate from our faith, they're helping us to stay true to it. Certainly, I found that our decision making and collaboration as a Vinnie's National Council was more interesting, mature, respectful, and ultimately beneficial when it included a wider range of ages, genders, sexualities, and religious experiences than the early days when it was just me and 15 straight, white, married, grey-haired Catholic men. And I think if you're just relying on all your people being baptised, practising Catholics in order to maintain your Catholic ethos, then you're doing it wrong. I mean, look at the church hierarchy and how it handled reports of child sex abuse when it was only male Catholic priests around the table. There needs to be something more that keeps the beautiful values of our faith alive, and non-Catholics can help with that. They shouldn't be seen as a threat. I spoke earlier about Frederick Osmond in Paris being challenged to show us your good works. It took the non-Christian students to hold the mirror up to Frederick and his Catholic mates and call out the fact that they weren't actually practising what they purported to believe in. As a result, Frederick and his friends stepped up and started to do better. When Mary MacKillop was being isolated and driven away from the church, it was a number of various non-Christians who gave her shelter and support. In his 2020 encyclical Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis discussed the story of the Good Samaritan, and in doing so, he called on us not to overlook one particular detail. The detail that he urged us not to overlook was this: the passers-by, the men who crossed to the other side of the street, rather than stopping to render assistance to the beaten and bleeding man, were religious. Pope Francis said, "A believer may be untrue to everything that his faith demands of him, and yet think he is close to God and better than others. The guarantee of an authentic openness to God, on the other hand, is a way of practising the faith that helps open our hearts to our brothers and sisters. Paradoxically, those who claim to be unbelievers can sometimes put God's will into practice better than believers." So in closing, our community needs us, especially those in our community who are doing it tough. They need us not just to help address their immediate needs, material, educational, health, social support, but they need us to challenge the unjust systems and structures that serve to make life harder than it should be for so many people. And this is so even and especially if it makes the hierarchy, political or church hierarchy, uncomfortable. Because that's what our founders and heroes and forebears did, and that's what's required. Our Catholic social services aren't separate from the church. We are the church, and we should proudly proclaim that. We should proclaim that actually this is what it means to be Catholic. The example of Jesus and the body of Catholic social teaching that guides us in how to apply that example to the injustices and challenges of the modern world calls us to actively fight to change those unjust structures, to be fearless, to be political, and to show uncommon courage as we do so. We can only do all of that with good, committed people in our ranks, and we do it best if those good, committed people bring with them a rich variety of life experiences. By actively seeking out and embracing people of different ages, genders and gender identities, sexualities, abilities, cultures, socio-economic backgrounds, and those of different religions and no religion, we'll be well armed to fight for a more just and compassionate Australia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. No doubt you've left us all with some food for thought and some inspiration about further exploring what really lies at the heart of the work we do and to have uncommon courage, as you called it. To further tease this out, it is my pleasure to welcome Sister Geraldine Larkins to the stage. She is a teacher, psychologist and leader in Catholic education with experience at school, higher education and system levels. Geraldine has held leadership positions, including religious education leader, deputy principal, deputy head of School of Education, ACU Melbourne, and deputy director, Catholic Mission and Identity in a rural diocese. Geraldine's current research interests and writing are theology for children, Catholic teachers and leaders formation, and aggression in children. Her current responsibilities include work in formation and successional teaching at ACU. Geraldine is a sister of St Joseph and a member of the regional leadership team. And I also have it on reliable authority by someone who sat next to her at Maths recently that she has a lovely singing. Welcome.
Well, that uses up all my time. Thank you, Bridget. I'd probably rather be singing than actually speaking, but that's okay. All right. Thank you, Claire. I know that Claire will be officially thanked, but I'm very grateful for Claire's challenging us through her words, and I think more importantly through your actions. I'm not sure when you get time to sleep. I'm sure it must be some time. We heard a very clear side of recognition of your privilege, but also the sharing of your gifts. And I also heard, I'm hoping other people did, that we are the church. And not just us, but everybody that's involved. I think that your call for striving for fairness and justice is a real challenge. I find a real challenge in the sense of, that sometimes it feels impossible to do something about the political structures and even the structures of church, the things that have been put in place, probably for good reasons in the first place, but that no longer serve us. And how do we, challenge those unjust structures? Even, when we think about our economic system, in our first world countries that really disadvantage, that people who don't have anything. So the more you have, the more you can get, and the less you have, the less you can get. But how do we break out of those kind of systems? So the scripture reading that I chose for this evening, before I heard Claire's talk, but which fits beautifully as the Spirit always works, was actually yesterday's evening prayer scripture from St James. Faith without works is dead. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but do not have works? Can faith save you? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. But someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I by my works will show you my faith. I think for me this scripture reading could have been Claire's anthem for this evening, and also the people that Claire spoke about, Frederick Ozanam and Rosalie, Sister Rosalie and Mary MacKillop and Hannah. Those people are all, I think, inspired by this scripture reading. I think to Claire's challenge to us in relation to human dignity was really important. Not just the human dignity of people that we like or people who are the same as us or people who go to church with us, but everybody, recognising that every person is made in the image and likeness of God. Wow, that is such a challenge. When we have kids in our classroom that really annoy us, I say to myself, every person is made in the image and likeness of God. When I have sisters who sometimes I struggle to cope with, every person is made in the image and likeness of God. It's a very strange God we have, but there you go. Everyone, with no exception, every person made in the image and likeness of God, and that's what we believe as Catholics. So absolutely, Claire's challenged to us to say, how do we accept, acknowledge, support, include every person in our work. And there were, when Claire was reading through our Catholic social teaching, this is, really fantastic. I think sometimes it's the best kept secret in Catholic circles. We've tried to get it out there in our schools. But I think, that real clear vision of Catholic social teaching can be a bit overwhelming. When you listen to that whole litany of what's expected of us. And yet, then it's not really that hard, and because we each need to do our own little bit. So as Josephites, we say, where one is, we all are. And I think similarly, each of us in this room could feel overwhelmed trying to live up to all of that Catholic social teaching, but everyone does what they can with the talents that they've been gifted with. And then each of us doing our own little bit with, when you look around the size of this gathering, just in this gathering, there's so much good work that happens for people. So we have that challenge of, thinking about how we dismantle those unjust structures, and Claire shared with us some of those beautiful people who have really, made a huge difference on their own. Most of us just make a little difference in our own little space. And I think that highlighting a couple of women this evening was really wonderful, because often in the past, like historically, women have done great work, but it hasn't been recognised. And the ABC has recently been playing women composers, historical women composers. Fanny Mendelssohn with her brother, alongside her brother, and her works were beautiful, fantastic works. And there was one today, and I can't remember the person's name, and I thought, why did it take me until I'm 63 to hear these fabulous compositions of these women composers? Well, because nobody played them. So it's, sometimes it takes the courage of people to say, this really should be known, and bringing that forward. So I hadn't heard of Hannah Buckley either. Probably all of you in here had heard of her. But thank you, Claire. I'm really grateful for hearing about her and her beginning all that work of Catholic social services in the past. So we are, as Claire said, enriched by including the diversity of people's views in our organisation, our decision-making, including non-Catholic employees, and we shouldn't really even have to say that actually. And I think, we could refer to our current Pope Francis, who has called us into dialogue and said, the importance of dialoguing with people, so not just amongst ourselves, but actually with people outside of our own circles. One of the things I like to do when I have supervision or spiritual direction, or working with someone who's working, for improvement of myself, I like to choose someone who's very different to me, who doesn't have a personality like me, or comes from a different kind of way of looking at the world, because otherwise all I do is confirm what I think, rather than being challenged to think differently and to say, well, how could I work, how can I get better at what I do? Well, the church similarly, we need to be thinking about, who's challenged us, how are we being challenged, how can we get better at what we do? And we don't have all the answers, obviously, as Claire has so rightly pointed out to us this evening. So we can all be people of courage. Interestingly, as Claire said, Mary MacKillop received much of her support from non-Catholics in her community when she was most in need. And so I thought I'd leave you with a quote of Mary MacKillop's, and it's not never see a need without trying to do something about it, because you've probably heard that one. But actually, Mary MacKillop said in 1900, so this was towards the end of her life, There is no true generosity without self-sacrifice. So if we're just doing what we're comfortable with and makes us feel good, it's not really true generosity. People need us to have the courage to be able to make a difference, and we gain our strength from Jesus as Christians. And ultimately, I think it's love which moves and animates us, and that we remember that God is love and that all people are made in the image and likeness of God, whether I like them or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Geraldine, when you were talking about children in schools who are reminding yourself that they're made in the image and likeness of God. I was thinking of my two kids and how I think about that, except that they're also made in my likeness. So a double whammy, and I have no one but myself to blame. Thank you for your response, and thank you again, Claire, for spending the time preparing such a thoughtful speech tonight. I will leave you all to commence your dessert. This is also all from me tonight. I want to extend a warm thanks to everyone who made tonight happen, but also a particular thanks to Catholic Social Services Australia and Catholic Social Services Victoria. So much work goes behind the scenes at a conference and a dinner like this, and they're the ducks looking all smooth on top of the water while their little legs are paddling. So if we could just have a warm round. I'd like to also thank everyone for coming and for participating in this event. I know it's going to be a very busy few days ahead, but I'm looking forward to seeing you at the rest of the conference, those of you who are coming. And thank you again to Catholic Social Services for welcoming us all with such grace tonight.